The Retro Collection second wave of Return of the Jedi figures has finally been delivered after a massive delay from Hasbro Pulse. Keep watching and I will get these out and I will give you my typical side-by-side comparison with the originals. Welcome back. Now, having had this delayed from Hasbro Pulse for about 2 months, it finally got delivered and I'm really excited to get into this. Now, this is of course the second wave of Return of the Jedi figures. So in this box, they've given us a Gamorrean Guard, Admiral Ackbar, Yak Face, very controversial, Mon Mothma for the first time, Wicket W. Warwick, and the Emperor's Royal Guard. Not necessarily the figures I would have chosen for a box set, but we'll see how they look once they get opened up. Now, I do love the fact on the top of the box here we have the images, which I'm assuming are also on the card backs, and seeing them like this is a real throwback to kind of 1983 and how I remember buying my Star Wars figures. Now, they've gone with this fake weathering on the box, which of course is completely unnecessary. And you know, this is printed, but I'm assuming the card backs will have this horrible sticker stuck on the front, which completely obscures some of the card backs artwork. But all in all, a good looking package, fake weathering aside. So as I said, I'm not here to talk about boxes or packages. I'm here to get these things opened up. So cut the tape here. Straightforward, and I believe there's been a problem with people getting these and the card backs are all damaged. That won't be a problem for me because they're all getting opened anyway. Gamorrean Guard, and I am making a point of saying Gamorrean Guard because that's how I said it as a kid. Oh, you know what? I think this card stock is slightly sturdier. I do believe it is. Okay. Yep, there is a sticker, of course, and the fake weathering. He's looking rather sort of googly-eyed. Again, stand by. We will get the side-by-side comparisons, but Gamorrean Guard, he looks okay. Ah, Admiral Ackbar. Pretty much how I remember him from the 80s. Ah, Mon Mothma. So this is the one I'm guessing most people are buying this set for, because as you surely know by now, this was never released by Kenner. It looks okay. She comes with one of those sort of Leia blasters. I don't believe we ever saw her in the movie with one of these, but I guess it could be argued that she played a much bigger role in the movie than Medine, and he got his figure with his pointing stick, so yeah, she looks okay, I guess. This is Yak Face. This one probably sent shockwaves through the community of elitist collectors, knowing that they can no longer, you know, charge thousands for their original when people will just buy one of these. Looks pretty good. Wicket Warwick. I think I'm on record as saying this is one of the worst ever Star Wars figures, and I stand by that. Yeah, really, if they were doing Ewoks, I would not have chosen this one, but I understand he, you know, probably the most famous Ewok, but not one that I like as a figure. And last of all, Emperor's Royal Guard. I'm looking forward to seeing how this one stacks up, because I will be using this one in a small display I'm going to put together. But anyway, let's get these opened up and we'll do the quick side-by-side comparisons to see how well Hasbro has replicated the classics from Kenner. Doing her thing solo. Now, got to be honest, it's a very well sculpted figure. It has absolutely kept that vintage Kenner style, and of course, being a figure we never had before, this is the first time we've seen her in a Kenner style figure. All in all, very good looking figure, and I'm very happy to say she holds the blaster extremely well. I think Hasbro learned their lesson after the first wave of Retro Collection, where those figures just cannot hold their blasters. She holds hers extremely well, and for a figure we've never had before, it's a very much welcomed addition to any classic vintage Star Wars collection. Now we're looking at the Gamorrean Guard, and as with all these examples, I have the vintage Kenner on the left and the new Hasbro Retro Collection on the right. Initially, I thought the Retro Collection had the eyes looking rather googly, but when I look at them side by side, as you can see in this close-up, I think they've done a pretty good job. Now, obviously, with mine being, 40 years old at this point, the paint is not as vibrant looking, but all in all, it really is a very, very good representation of this figure. And if, like me, you want to have a really, really good looking collection on display, you can't go wrong with getting these Retro Collection figures and adding them next to your vintage figures, because as you can see, very little difference indeed. Just the fact that it's slightly newer, shinier looking, but aside from that, they're pretty much exactly the same. The axe very much looks the same. Obviously, a closer inspection would reveal that it is a modern reproduction, if you will, but all in all, for a representation of a figure that's 40 years old, they've done a really good job on this one. And now we have Wicket Warwick with the original Kenner being on the left right here. Now, aside from the fact that this one is, 40 years newer, these, to my eye, look pretty much the exact same. There are slight differences in colour, but aside from that, these are pretty much identical to each other. Now, as he spins around here, you will see that the Retro Collection, his spear is somewhat bent. That was due to how it was packaged, which is not too good. But aside from that bend, and I guess the slightly softer sculpting to it, the spears look pretty much identical as well. So all in all, they've done a really good job on this, and whilst this is not one of my favourite figures, and in fact it's probably one of the worst figures in the whole line, for a representation of a 40-year-old figure, they've done a really good job. And like I said before, if you are looking to have really good examples in your collection, you can't go wrong with getting one of these. And now we have the Emperor's Royal Guard, which is the figure I was most looking forward to. Now you can see already, or maybe you can't on camera, but trust me on this, whilst they look identical, there is a definite difference in the fabric used for the cape. Nothing major, but it is noticeable that it's not quite the same. Also feels a bit different as well, but once it's on display, that really won't matter too much. The head sculpt is basically identical, very hard to distinguish it from the original. And in both cases, the spear, I think the original one is possibly slightly thicker. But aside from that, no major differences. So really, the only thing that kind of distinguishes the two is the material used on the cloak. And I'm wondering if that's going to put people off, because whether or not it's coming through on camera, but you may have to take my word for it, it definitely looks different. I think the original has an almost sort of rougher look to the fabric. The new one is extremely smooth, and also the way it was packaged, his cloak is somewhat misshapen. I will need to maybe deal with that somehow. But all in all, another good figure from the Retro Collection. Now we have Admiral Ackbar, and I'm actually amazed at how well my original is held up. I thought mine would have looked quite yellow in comparison, but the paint on mine, or the white elements I should say, are still pretty bright, and whilst not quite as bright as this new version, still not bad for a figure that's 40 years old. Now, quite noticeable is the fact that on the new one, the head sculpt is much, much softer. Not nearly as much detail on his sort of skin flaps, and it's got a much shinier look to it. But that aside, the bodies are pretty identical, and considering mine is 40 years old, I'm amazed how fresh it's looking next to this new one. Now the pointing stick, very similar. I'm sure there will be instances of people passing these off as genuine, although with Ackbar not being one of the more expensive figures, not really a problem. Although from looking at it here, it does look as if the original is slightly thinner. But that aside, and the soft head sculpt, really a good example of a classic figure from 1983. And now we have the controversial figure, this of course being Yak Face. Now, to make things even more controversial, due to me not being a complete idiot, I did not spend hundreds of dollars for an original Kenner, so I am comparing the Retro Collection against a Stan Solo Creations version. Now, when looking at these side by side, I actually think the Stan Solo Creations version has much more detail to the head sculpt. Again, with these Retro Collections, the sculpts are very soft. There is way more detailing on the Stan Solo version. The colours used are similar. I think Stan Solo went with a slightly darker colour scheme, and as with the figure's head, I think there is slightly sharper details on the staff of the Stan Solo when compared to the Retro Collection, but this is a very welcomed figure to the Retro Collection line for the reasons that the originals from Kenner, they are just far too expensive. There is no reason an action figure should be in the hundreds of dollars, and given that it wasn't released in America, it has become one of the priciest figures to add to a collection. So the fact that Hasbro has now allowed people with a modest budget to add Yak Face to the collection can only be celebrated. And as with everything else in this line, whilst it's not identical to the originals from Kenner, they have done a really good job, and if you are on a budget, this is the Yak Face for you. So once again, Hasbro has done a good job of replicating some classics from the 80s, and in the case of Mon Mothma, giving us a new figure to add to our vintage collections. Now sadly, I think the upcoming waves of this line are focusing on the Disney TV shows, which I really have no great interest in. I really wish they would use this line of figures just to do the whole shebang and reproduce everything that was done in the 80s, which would allow people who want a really mint-looking vintage Star Wars figure collection to do so at a really reasonable price. But for some reason, Hasbro insists on doing figures retro style for modern TV shows. Makes no sense to me, but what do I know? So hope you enjoyed that side-by-side comparison. Please do let me know in the comments what you think. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Leave a quick like, share it, make sure you're subscribed, and stay tuned for more videos from All Things 80s.